This episode of Please Explain is sponsored by Aware Super, helping you get more from your future.
From the newsrooms of the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age, this is Please Explain. I'm Samantha Selinger-Morris. It's Thursday, July 20th.
We want fair pay! We want fair pay!
Hollywood is on strike. Over the last week, we've seen some of the biggest stars in the business marching on picket lines in New York and Los Angeles. And others, like Margot Robbie and Matt Damon, have been speaking out.
No, I'm very much in support of all the unions, and I'm a part of SAG, so I would absolutely stand by that.
What we would be striking for is unbelievably important. We ought to protect the people who are kind of on the margins.
So what's behind this outpouring of anger and sense of betrayal being felt not just by thousands of Hollywood actors, but by even more of its writers? Today, culture reporter Thomas Mitchell on what's behind this historic Hollywood shutdown and just how long it might last. So, Thomas, you cover the entertainment industry here every day. And before we unpack the key issues underlying this strike, can you tell me, when did you realize that this was going to be a really big deal?
Yeah, I guess we've known for a while that it was potentially coming. Obviously, the Writers Guild has been on strike for a little while, but I can give you a very specific time. It was at 3:37 a.m. on Friday morning when I received an email from the agent of Jeremy Allen White. He's the star of The Bear. He's up for an Emmy. And his agent emailed me and was like, unfortunately, Jeremy is no longer available because as a result of the SAG strike, what falls under, their kind of ban is also doing promotional activities. So I kind of woke up on a Friday and I was like, well, firstly, the strikes happened essentially overnight and it's going to have very real world implications in my job. And of course, it's much broader than that. But that's when I realized that, we're on here.
Wow. Okay. So can you walk me through the background to this strike? Because there's actually two unions striking at the moment. It's quite historic. And so who do they represent and who are they bargaining with?
So basically, the Writers Guild has been on strike for a few months now. That's the Writers Guild of America, the WGA. And that represents the writers of all of our favourite shows. That's essentially why late night TV in America has been dark, because there's no one to write the gear. And the things that them and the Screen Actors Guild, who's the other body on strike, who represents 160,000 actors, including all of our most famous stars, they're very much striking about the same things. But yeah, so the writers have been on strike since May 2. And then the actors have been on strike since July 13th. And it marks the first time in 63 years that both SAG, who represents the actors, and WGA, who represents the writers, have been on strike at the same time. So basically, the WGA and SAG negotiate with the AMPTP, which is the Alliance of Motion Picture and Television Producers. So that's a body that represents essentially the studios, or kind of the faceless goons, if we like to think of them in that way. But essentially, that boils down to Paramount Pictures, Sony, Universal, Walt Disney, and Warner Brothers, as well as all the streaming platforms. So Netflix, Apple, Amazon. So that's kind of like the big studios and streamers that house the content. And they negotiate deals essentially with the WGA and SAG.
Okay.
And then, every kind of few years they renegotiate those deals.
And then I think it was to many a person's surprise that we now get as one of the main key players in this fight is Fran Drescher, who famously played the nanny.
Correct.
In that 1990s TV hit, The Nanny. So can you tell us a bit about how she comes into this? She's the president of the Actors Union. And what did she say when she announced that the actors were striking? Because her speech has been covered across social media. She didn't hold back. She even sort of referred to this fight between the unions and the Hollywood studios with the sort of language that we're sort of used to hearing from civil rights leaders. So can you take us through this?
Yeah, I mean, it is kind of weird that it's Fran Drescher. It's kind of like, was it going to be her or like Frasier or Seinfeld? Someone from the 90s sitcom. Yeah. No, so Fran Drescher is the head of SAG. She was been voted in a few years ago very narrowly. And she's had a kind of up and down time in her role. There have been some criticisms leveled at her, but she basically had her moment when this strike was announced.
Thank you, Duncan, and thank you, everybody, for coming to this press conference today. It's really important.
She gave this speech after negotiations broke down, and it was one of those kind of like take your breath away speeches almost.
We have a problem, and we are experiencing that right at this moment. This is a very seminal hour for us.
She basically came up to this pulpit and was like, shame on you, to the studios.
How they plead poverty, that they're losing money left and right when giving hundreds of millions of dollars to their CEOs. It is disgusting. Shame on them. They stand on the wrong side of history at this very moment.
She addressed the fact that, this is not just a labor industrial movement about a bunch of rich actors. This is, a cost of living crisis. This is representing all of us, really. And this movement is not about the rich people. It's about the people who are struggling to pay their rent, who need the residuals to survive.
The entire business model has been changed by streaming, digital, AI. This is a moment of history that is a moment of truth. If we don't stand tall right now, we are all going to be in trouble. We are all going to be in jeopardy of being replaced by machines and big business. Who cares more about Wall Street than you and your family?
She kind of like impassioned the Treaty of Versailles and compared it to, where eventually we break down the walls of Versailles. And it was like a speech that was befitting the moment.
We are labor and we stand tall and we demand respect and to be honored for our contribution. You share the wealth because you cannot exist without us. Thank you.
So yeah, it was definitely a moment for Fran Drescher, and I think it was a big flashpoint in like catapulting this story to the top of the news cycle and into people's conscious.
Okay, now you mentioned residuals there, so that takes us to what is actually at stake here. So can you unpack some of the issues one at a time? What is the argument, firstly, around residuals?
Yeah, so one of the biggest sticking points is the payment of residuals. So back before the rise of streaming, if you were on a TV show and that TV show continued to rerun, they play repeats, you'd get paid a payment continually year on year, which were quite significant payments, which you could survive off. So if you were just a background actor or an extra, or you had 2 lines in, Seinfeld 20 years ago, you could survive off that. The advent of streaming changed the residual game. And so essentially, residuals are now based on how many subscribers the streamers have, because streamers do not share data of how much a show is watched. So you might be on a really unsuccessful show on a streaming platform, or you might be on Squid Game on Netflix, and you will see the same amount of residuals, like it's not success-based. So that's become a real issue because the residuals are now so small that you can't live off that. And we've had this week, a cast member from Orange is the New Black, a kind of like second-tier cast member, taking a video of her residuals and showing it's like all up for the show run, $2.27. So essentially, one of the biggest things they're fighting for is that they want the streamers to either share their data, which will then be able to make residuals success-based. So if you're on a successful show, you get a decent residual, like in accordance with how well the show has performed. The streamers are famous for refusing to share their data. It's like one thing all of them are in agreement with. So yeah, essentially residuals are probably the biggest sticking point right now.
Okay, and so what about artificial intelligence? Because I understand that that's another major sticking point that's at the heart of all this.
Yeah, so AI is probably the one other main thing. Now look, SAG is saying that they're not seeking to ban AI because, this is the future. We can't pretend it's not happening. But they want to make sure that people are properly compensated for the use of AI and that it's done with consent. It's probably important to say the issue with AI in terms of these negotiations is not about, Harrison Ford being de-aged in Indiana Jones 5. It's about background actors. So as it stands, the deal from the studios essentially is asking background actors to sign, they can do a day's work for, I think it's $190 Australian, and then the studio will own their likeness and their image in perpetuity forever to repurpose as they see fit, which is obviously insane. So that means you can do 1 day's work as a background extra on Barbie or Oppenheimer, and then the studio can, instead of having to rehire a background extra for the next, large-scale film that has a crowd scene, they can just reuse your likeness. And again, this has come down to people live off the money that comes from that, performance, and it's being kind of cut off at the knees.
Wow. I mean, it's kind of astonishing. And these are huge fault lines. So we understand, okay, they can't get agreement. They announce a strike. But can you tell us a bit about the immediate reaction to all of this? Because some of the biggest stars in the business have not been shy in voicing their opinion and really their outrage at what they see as a betrayal by the studio bosses. One actor's even made what some have seen as a veiled threat to an unnamed head of a studio before later apologizing. So can you just sort of walk us through this?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely been a very, I'd say, impressive response from Hollywood. I think it's important to consider the optics of this. Like, I reckon, the A-list, they know how important it is for them to be seen at the picket line and to be seen in solidarity, because it isn't about them. Like, no one's worried about whether or not Matt Damon will be able to pay his bills.
No.
But it's important, like, optically for them to be involved. I guess starting with the Ron Perlman incident is a good kind of, snapshot of how depressingly grim this has become. There was a story in Deadline that essentially was leaked that said studio bosses were prepared to let this go on until writers and actors died on the vine. And the quote, I think, was, "We're prepared for them to lose their houses, lose their apartments, and once it gets to that, then they'll break." That quote was kind of the worst possible thing that the studios could have let slip, because that really made them seem like the cold, faceless corporate entity that we all suspect they may be. And so once that kind of started doing the rounds, that's when Ron Perlman, famously playing Hellboy, don't want to anger Hellboy, he came out on Twitter and said, kind of like shot this menacing video where he was like, look, there's lots of ways you can lose your house.
There's a lot of ways to lose your house. You wish that on people. You wish that families starve while you're making $27 million a year for creating nothing. Be careful, mother. Be really careful. Because that's the kind of that stirs up.
Kind of implying that he was going to, I don't know, maybe track down these, CEOs and have some harsh words. Yeah, he later retracted that, but it just kind of, I guess it reflects how serious this has become, how, much it plays on people's emotions. And when you're talking about people's livelihoods and losing their houses, this is not a game. This is not about, the rich trying to get richer. This is about people trying to survive.
Right. And so tell us, how has this impacted the local industry? Because it has already.
Yeah, well, almost instantly, it was announced here on Friday in Australia, and we've essentially got two major productions happening right now. We've got Apples Never Fall, which is a new Amazon Prime series shooting in Queensland for $79 million budget. Stars Sam Neill and Annette Bening and Alison Brie. That's shooting up in Queensland, and it was basically tools down. We heard from a source on set that on Thursday, Annette Bening did a big speech to the cast, kind of bid them farewell, spoke to them about why this was so important, and then she was on the next plane back to Los Angeles. Wow. Same thing with Alison Brie. The other thing that's shooting up in Queensland is Mortal Kombat 2, another kind of large-scale motion picture, stars Carl Urban from Star Trek, and yeah, same thing, tools down at 5 p.m. So you've got two, massive productions, and within, moments, they're completely derailed. It doesn't mean a full shutdown in Australia, because of course we have lots of productions that don't feature SAG or WGA members. So The Office Australia, for instance, is in pre-production. That's going to be a Prime show, and that's, all Australian cast, all Australian crew, so that will continue. But yeah, it's essentially tools down around the world for anything that features SAG members.
So what's the end game here? I mean, how long could this go on for?
Well, this is kind of the, billion-dollar question. It's going to cost a lot of people a lot of money. But, I mean, what we're hearing is don't expect this to be finished before September at the absolute earliest. And I think the biggest issue is, the writer's strike's been going on for months. The last time this happened, it went on for over 7 months. The biggest issue, though, is how far away the two parties are on the big issues. So on the use of AI, the studios came out and said, we've offered this groundbreaking proposal and it's going to change the face of AI, and it's, probably the fairest option we can give right now. SAG came out and said, if you think this is groundbreaking, you're out of your minds. Essentially, what the AMPT proposal is they want to use a digital replica of a background actor in a motion picture or TV series for which the background actor is employed. So that they're saying, we will pay you for that one day, but we want to continue to use the image subject to a minimum payment with the background actor's consent. So, I think that the sticking point is that the studios want to say, we will continue to pay. We won't just pay you once. We will continue to pay you subject to a minimum payment. So they could agree, essentially bargain you down to a matter of cents. And the way SAG is interpreting that is, you want us to sign off on a deal that makes us no money, but because we've got, especially background actors have no leverage, we have to agree to that. So, you might be able to use it in perpetuity and we get paid 5 cents every time you use it, which is negligible. And then similarly, on the residual issue, the studios are absolutely balking at the idea of sharing their data. But that is so important in order to, people to be properly compensated. So I think what it boils down to is they're really far apart in the big issues, and it doesn't really seem like anyone's going to break. So, we've got a content pipeline that will probably last us another 4 or 5 months. There's obviously stuff that's been shot and produced and is ready to go. There won't be any promotion around it, but the studios will be able to survive. The other, issue for the SAG side of things is that we are in a global content pipeline now. Like Netflix will have Heartbreak High 2 from Australia coming out, and so they'll just put that around the world. And there are shows for where the unions are not involved, like from England and Korea, and so it kind of buys them a bit more time compared to the last time we're in the situation.
But it could, change the face of what we see really quite significantly.
Well, yeah, I think it's one of those things. In the first few weeks, you won't feel it. And then maybe after a couple of months, you'll really start to feel the pinch. And especially consumers will start to feel the pinch when you realize there's nothing new dropping on Netflix. There's no new films to see. So that's when I think it'll start to get, quite hairy. It wouldn't surprise me if we were in this situation come December, January.
Wow. Thanks, Thomas, for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Today's episode of Please Explain was produced by Hannah Mills-Turbot, with technical assistance by Chi Wong. Our executive producer is Ruby Schwartz. Please Explain is a production of The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald. If you enjoy the show and want more of our journalism, subscribe to our newspapers today. It's the best way to support what we do. Search The Age or smh.com.au/subscribe. I'm Samantha Salinger-Morris. This is Please Explain. Thanks for listening.
This episode of Please Explain was brought to you by Aware Super. With super advice and super returns, Aware Super is super helpful. For more information about Aware Super, including their PDS and TMD, visit aware.com.au.